A waitress is publicly humiliated by a wealthy businessman who thinks his money gives him the right to crush anyone beneath him. But when a group of bikers realizes the young woman is one of their own, the power in the room begins to shift. What started as an act of arrogance turns into a moment of truth and a lesson about respect that no amount of money can buy. Just wait until you see how justice rides in when the Iron Meridian decides enough is enough. The late afternoon sun melted into streaks of bronze along Route 17, turning the asphalt into a slow-moving river of light. The rumble of engines echoed down the road like distant thunder rolling over farmland and forgotten motels. For the Iron Meridian Motorcycle Club, it was the kind of Saturday that tasted like freedom. Gasoline, open air, and just enough danger to feel alive. Jack "Rody" Carter led the pack, his Harley gleaming with years of road dust polished into pride. Behind him rode Miguel "Torque" Alvarez, mechanic, loyal to the bone, and Dana "Switch" Parker, quick-witted, sharp as the chrome tools she carried in her saddlebags. They weren't the kind of bikers people feared anymore. They were the kind that fixed flat tires for strangers, escorted charity runs, and believed in one thing above all: respect. Their ride ended where it often did, Miller's Diner, a holdover from the 50s. Neon buzzed in faded pink letters over a window fogged with steam. The place smelled like pancakes, bacon, and the kind of coffee that kept long-haul drivers awake through Kansas. Inside, the world slowed down. Clinking plates, a jukebox that only knew 3 songs, and the hum of conversations that never made headlines. Jack killed the engine, swung his boot to the ground, and stretched his back. "Smells like heartburn and happiness," Torque joked, pulling off his gloves. They stepped inside, and that's when they heard it, a voice cutting through the diner like broken glass. "Do you not understand plain English?" The man speaking wasn't loud in volume, but in presence. He stood at the counter, wrapped in a tailored navy suit that cost more than a week's worth of wages for most folks in the room. His shoes were mirror bright, his hair perfectly aligned, his watch the size of a silver dollar. He looked out of place, like a businessman who'd taken a wrong exit and decided to punish the world for it. Across from him, a waitress froze mid-step, clutching a plate so tight her knuckles paled. "I'm so sorry, sir. You just can't follow a simple order," he cut in, waving his hand. "I said oat milk, not whatever this is, and maybe turn down the noise. Some of us value peace and quiet." At the far booth, a small group sang a birthday song, cheerful and off-key. The man turned toward them, eyes narrowing. "Is this a diner or a circus?" The line cook paused mid-flip, spatula hovering. The mother of a boy with a red balloon lowered her voice. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Anger landed first, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that burns low, spreading from one booth to the next. The bikers had seen enough to know cruelty when it strutted in wearing polished leather shoes. Jack watched, silent, eyes narrowing as the waitress stammered through another apology. But something about her voice pulled him closer. He couldn't place it, steady but shaken underneath, like a familiar song played too slow. Then she turned, and he saw the heart-shaped birthmark just below her ear. The same one he used to kiss goodnight when she was 5. His heart tripped. "Lily?" he said, half standing before his mind caught up. She froze. Recognition flashed, then vanished behind the professional smile waitresses wear when they can't afford to feel. "I've got it, Dad," she said softly, almost pleading. "Please, sit." Jack stopped mid-motion. The years between them, the arguments, the silence, her stubborn independence, hung in the space like smoke. He sat back down slowly, eyes never leaving her. The man in the suit rolled his eyes. "Oh, wonderful, a family reunion. Can we get back to service now?" Jack didn't answer. He only looked at his daughter, his Lily, working a double shift, facing a storm she hadn't created. His hands clenched around his coffee cup. Outside, the sun slipped lower, and the reflection of chrome on the window made it look like fire crawling up the glass. Inside, the air thickened with the scent of brewing conflict, the kind that starts quiet, in words, before anyone realizes how deep it can cut. Jack Rhodey Carter didn't learn about Lily's new job from her. He learned it from the name tag now trembling against her apron. The last time they spoke about money, she'd made it clear she didn't need any. "I can handle it, Dad," she'd said, eyes hard but tired. Nursing school loans, rent, books. She wanted to earn every dollar on her own, as if independence were something sacred that might disappear if anyone helped her carry it. And so Jack had stepped back. It had been the hardest promise he'd ever kept, to let her fight her own battles, even when it hurt to watch. He thought he'd been giving her space. Now, sitting in that diner, he realized how much distance it crept in with it. Charles Whitmore, on the other hand, lived in an entirely different world, one where power meant you never had to wait for anything. His boutique development firm specialized in taking over struggling neighborhoods and revitalizing them into sleek, glossy destinations. To him, kindness was a tool, not a value. Politeness was a mask for leverage. That morning, his world had tilted slightly off balance. A late investor call, a newspaper headline accusing his company of displacing low-income tenants, and a stomach unsettled by black coffee and bad press. He wasn't the type to explode. He was the type to correct, and when the world failed to behave, he turned correction into punishment. Now, inside this diner of linoleum and chrome, he saw another flaw that needed fixing. A waitress who dared to look him in the eye after an inconvenience. "Is customer service a foreign concept to you?" he said, raising his voice just enough for the nearest booths to hear. He angled his phone, ready to film his own indignation like it was proof of virtue. "This place is a lawsuit with laminate flooring." The words dropped like stones. Conversations died mid-sentence. Mrs. Miller, the elderly owner who had run this diner for 40 years, froze at the register. Her arthritic hands clenched around a towel, as though wringing strength from it. Jack's chest tightened. He saw his daughter's shoulders lock, not with fear, but with something deeper, discipline. That quiet strength he'd seen when she was 12 and refused to quit softball after breaking her wrist. She drew a breath, steady, professional, unshaken. "Sir," Lily said, voice clear, "I can comp the coffee, replace the order, or you're free to go, but you can't speak to me like that." Her words were calm, but they carried the weight of every person who's ever had to choose between pride and a paycheck. Charles gave a short, humorless laugh, sharp as a car horn in a tunnel. "I can speak however I want," he said. "I know your landlord. I make one call and this dump becomes a parking lot." The threat wasn't just arrogance, it was habit. He meant it. To him, that was the natural order of things. The powerful reshaping the weak because they could. Mrs. Miller's lips tightened. Her eyes, once bright with small-town warmth, dimmed under the fluorescent lights. But she didn't speak. The diner, her whole life's work, now balanced on the whim of a man who treated it like collateral. At the back booth, Torque leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "We playing through or calling it?" he murmured. "Not yet," Jack said quietly. His jaw flexed. His hands were fists on the table. He could feel every muscle in his arms begging to intervene, but his daughter's voice held him there, steady, capable, proud. He remembered her first hospital volunteer shift, how she came home exhausted but glowing, telling him about a patient who couldn't afford their meds but smiled anyway. "It's not about what people deserve," she'd said. "It's about what they need." Now that same girl stood under the weight of a man who believed everything could be bought, even dignity. Lily's hands shook, but her chin didn't lower. The bikers watched her like they'd watch one of their own facing down a storm. You don't jump in unless she calls for you. You trust her until the moment you can't. Charles leaned closer to her, his tone low and cutting. You people really don't know who you're serving, do you? Jack heard the words like a match being struck. The diner's hum turned into static in his ears. I saw Torque straighten, saw Switch's hand drift to her phone, ready to record. But still, Jack waited. Because every instinct in him wanted to stand, to defend, to shield. But this wasn't about him. This was about his daughter, proving that she could hold her ground in a world that didn't hand out fairness. He watched her spine straighten, watched her swallow fear and replace it with resolve. That quiet transformation, from apology to authority, was the moment I saw her not as the girl I'd raised, but as the woman she'd become. And though anger burned through her ribs, beneath it all was something stronger, pride, laced with pain. The kind that makes a father realize his daughter no longer needs his protection, only his respect. The air inside Miller's diner had turned heavy, like the seconds before thunder. The jukebox had gone silent. Even the fryer hissed softer, as if the place itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The only sound now was the scrape of a metal spoon against porcelain, deliberate and cold. Charles Whitmore lifted the spoon, twirling it between manicured fingers, then let it drop. The clang echoed across the diner floor like a challenge. "Since details are hard," he said with a thin smile, "try cleaning that. Maybe start with competence." The words hung there, cruel, careless, and precise. He didn't shout, he didn't have to. It was the kind of voice people obeyed out of habit, the one built in boardrooms and behind locked doors. Lily didn't move. Her shoulders were squared, her face neutral, but her eyes told a different story, hurt, then defiance. "I'm not picking that up while you're filming me," she said, her voice even but trembling around the edges. The phone in Charles's hand gleamed like a weapon of another kind, one made for humiliation. He wanted her reaction. He wanted control. Mrs. Miller stepped forward, towel in hand. "Sir, that's enough." But Jack was already moving. He stood up slowly, the kind of slow that made people notice. He didn't tower or threaten. He simply arrived, steady as a storm front. His denim jacket bore the iron meridian patch, silver and rust against worn black leather. "I'm Jack," he said quietly, his tone too calm to be ignored. "You're gonna stop." Charles turned, scanning the man who'd interrupted him, the weathered face, the oil-stained hands, the road map of scars that spoke of years outside office walls. To Charles, Jack was background, one of those men who fixed things, carried things, protected things, but didn't belong in polished rooms. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "I'm going to finish my breakfast," he said coolly, "and teach your daughter some manners." Jack's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. But something behind his eyes shifted, a slow, dangerous kind of calm that made Torque sit up straight at the booth. Switch's hand slipped into her jacket pocket, pulling out her phone. She pressed record, angling it just enough to catch everything without turning the moment into spectacle. The Iron Meridian had rules. No fists unless there's danger. No threats unless you can stand behind them. No one talks down to the staff. They weren't outlaws, not anymore. They were a family that believed respect wasn't optional. Torque quietly pushed his plate aside and stood, strolling toward the window like a man who'd seen this play out before. Outside, the bright white Bentley sat crooked across two parking spaces. One of them marked blue and white, clearly reserved for disabled parking. He took out his phone, snapped a photo, and tucked it away. Charles, still oblivious, was dialing his phone. The call went on speaker. "Dan, it's me," he said, keeping his eyes locked on Lily. "The Miller lease. Let's have the compliance team take a look. Health code, ADA, whatever sticks. You know the drill." Mrs. Miller's face went pale. Her diner, the only thing left after her husband passed, was now a pawn in this man's game. For a moment, Jack's chest burned with rage so hot it felt cold. Every instinct screamed to step forward, to shut this down the old-fashioned way. But then he looked at Lily, her hands trembling, but her stance solid. "Hey," he said softly, almost in a whisper meant just for her. "You want out?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and the man in the suit. She could leave. He'd walk her out, ride her home, and let the whole place burn behind them. But she shook her head. "I want to finish my shift," she said. Jack's jaw tightened, but pride pushed through the fury. "Then we finish it with you," he said. He stepped just close enough that Charles could see the patch on his back. Iron Meridian Motorcycle Club. A name that to some meant trouble. But to those who knew better, it meant something else. A promise that no one stood alone. Charles smirked, pretending not to notice the silent shift in the room. The line cook who'd set down his spatula. The young mother holding her child a little closer. The bikers who now watched him with quiet, focused eyes. He thought he still owned the space. But what he didn't realize was that a line had just been drawn. Not in chalk or ink, but in silence. A line between power and pride. Between what could be bought and what never would be. Jack didn't have to say another word. The message was already there, written in the stillness that followed. "You've crossed enough lines today. Don't take one more step." For a moment, no one moved. The diner seemed frozen mid-breath, caught between fury and fear. Then, quietly, reality began to turn. It didn't take much, just a few small acts, each one deliberate, each one tipping the balance. At the booth near the window, the little boy's mother leaned toward her son, whispering softly. Then she turned to the bikers. "He parked in a disabled spot," she murmured, her voice carrying just enough for Torque to hear. Torque's eyes flicked toward the window. There it was, the white Bentley gleaming under the sun, spread arrogantly across two spaces, one of them marked with a bright blue wheelchair symbol. He didn't hesitate. One quick motion, phone out, photo taken, thumb flying across the screen. The message went to his friend Mike, a local patrol officer who worked the weekend shift. The caption was short. "Need a check outside Miller's, Bentley, 2 spaces, one's ADA." No threats, no raised voices, just quiet, efficient accountability, the kind small towns still remember how to enforce. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, Switch was already working her own kind of precision. Her camera didn't linger on faces or catch emotions for drama. It caught facts, the spoon on the floor, the untouched cup of coffee, the empty oat milk shelf that proved the waitress hadn't lied. Lily's calm words, Charles's condescension, the moment his threats crossed the line from complaint to cruelty. Switch tapped the screen twice, added a caption and posted it on the diner's Facebook page, the one Mrs. Miller used for breakfast specials and lost dog alerts. The post was simple, plain, impossible to misread. "No one should be talked to like this. We stand with our waitress." It was a small-town statement, but in a small town, things spread faster than wildfire. Charles, sensing attention shifting, did what people who thrive on control often do when they start losing it. He doubled down. He puffed himself up, voice louder, tone harder. "This is defamation," he said sharply, looking at Switch's phone as if he could order it into silence. But before anyone could respond, red and blue lights flickered against the diner windows. A cruiser pulled in slow, its reflection sliding across the chrome counter. The bell over the door jingled as Officer Mike stepped inside, calm and polite but focused. "Afternoon," he said. "Who owns the Bentley outside?" Charles straightened, relief flashing across his face, mistaking authority for alliance. "I do," he said quickly. "Good, you're here, these people." But Mike was already holding up a notepad. "Sir, your vehicle is obstructing a marked accessible space." Charles blanked, the script in his mind faltering. "Do you know who I am?" It wasn't arrogance exactly, it was reflex. He said it like someone testing a password that had always worked before. The officer's expression didn't change. He gestured out the window. "I know what that sign means," he said evenly. He handed over the citation, followed by a small yellow slip. "And that's a tow notice. You'll need to clear it before you leave." Silence fell. Real silence, the kind that means the ground has shifted under someone's feet. For the first time, Charles seemed unsure. His eyes darted toward the window, toward the flashing lights that painted streaks across the diner's linoleum. He turned, scanning the faces now watching him, not with fear, not even with anger, but with something far worse for a man like him, quiet disapproval. Then his phone buzzed, once, twice, then again. He looked down. Messages from his partner. "Saw the video, take it down. Apologize, now. You're trending for the wrong reason." He felt it then, that hollow, sickening drop when control slips out of reach. The algorithm had already outrun his influence. He was no longer the storyteller. He was the story. Jack didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just turned to his daughter and asked, "Last call, want me to take this or you got it?" Lily took a long breath. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice came out steady, calm, clear, professional. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "you can stay if you stop filming me and stop threatening my boss. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." It wasn't a plea, it was policy, and it carried more authority than any badge of money or title could offer. For a long moment, Charles didn't answer. He looked around, at the officer, at the bikers, at Mrs. Miller behind the counter, at the quiet witnesses who had stopped pretending not to see. Every person in the room had become a mirror, showing him who he was. And for the first time that day, he didn't like what he saw. He lowered his phone, slowly, carefully, like a man setting down a weapon he no longer wanted to hold. The tension that had wrapped around the diner began to loosen, one breath at a time. Cups clinked again. Someone exhaled. The balloon boy smiled, sensing the air had changed. Outside, the cruiser lights dimmed, and the sun came out from behind a passing cloud, washing the diner in soft, forgiving gold. The storm had passed, not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth, steady and simple, finding its way back into the room. Triumph didn't roar that afternoon. It whispered. It came not in applause or headlines, but in the small, deliberate sound of a man setting down his pride. Charles Whitmore stood by the counter, shoulders lower than before. The confidence that had once filled the room now deflated into something almost human. His hand hovered above the spoon still lying on the floor, the symbol of every cruel thing he'd said. For a long second, he just looked at it, that simple, shining curve of stainless steel, and saw himself reflected back in its dull surface. His voice faltered, quiet enough that even the fry cook had to lean in to hear. He swallowed hard, the air catching in his throat. I apologize. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. He bent, picked up the spoon himself, and placed it gently on the saucer. Then he took out his wallet, slow, almost reverent, and slid 2 crisp bills beneath the receipt. Twice what he owed. Not as a bribe, not even as penance, but as the only language of respect he seemed to know. No one clapped. No one gloated. The diner simply began to breathe again, like a town after a storm. Forks scraped plates. The coffee pot hissed. Someone laughed softly, testing whether the air was safe again. Mrs. Miller gave a small nod from behind the counter, a nod that said, "That'll do." The officer held the door open as Charles left, his polished shoes quieter than before. Outside, the tow truck still had his Bentley hitched, the chrome wheels turning uselessly in the sunlight. A loud lesson parked for all to see. Inside, the light felt different now, softer, kinder. Lily poured her father a fresh cup of coffee, the good kind, the kind she usually saved for regulars. She set it down gently in front of him, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the distance of years closing without words. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small metal trinket, a helmet keychain worn in silver, shaped like a heart. "For the next ride," he said quietly, "if you want on." For the first time that day, her composure broke into something brighter. The corner of her mouth lifted, not forced this time, but free. "I do," she said, "but I'm picking the playlist." He laughed, a low, warm sound that rolled through the diner like sunlight returning through the blinds. At the counter, Torque slid a wad of bills under the check, enough to cover not only their meal, but a week's worth of oat milk deliveries and a raise for Lily. "For the house," he said simply. Switch, tapping quietly on her phone, had already set up a fund for the diner staff. Not charity, community. "Just making sure this place keeps the lights on," she told Mrs. Miller, who tried to wave her off, but blinked fast against tears she refused to admit were there. "Dust," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Always too much dust in this place." Torque's photo of the Bentley, still parked illegally, ticket fluttering on the windshield, went viral faster than the original video. But this time, it wasn't outrage that spread. It was accountability. His caption read, "Respect isn't a favor. It's the rule." Comments flooded in, locals sharing stories about Mrs. Miller's kindness, truckers promising to stop by for a meal, students saying they knew that waitress from nursing school. What started as conflict turned into connection, the kind that actually mattered. By closing time, the tension that once hung heavy in the diner had been replaced by laughter, the kind that comes after surviving something together. The kid with the red balloon, now sticky with melted ice cream, walked up to Lily and handed her a bright yellow sticker that said, "You're brave." She crouched to his level, smiling. "So are you," she whispered back. Two regulars, a retired teacher and a mechanic, slipped an envelope into the tip jar with a note inside, "For the nurse who stood tall." Jack noticed but said nothing until they'd left. When he finally showed it to her, she hesitated. "I can't take that," she said automatically. "You're not taking it," he replied. "You earned it. There's a difference." Outside, the sun dipped low over Route 17, painting the diner in amber light. The neon sign hummed to life, "Miller's Diner, since 1959." The letters flickered, imperfect but proud, like everything and everyone inside. As the Iron Meridian prepared to leave, engines rumbled one by one, not loud, but steady, like a promise. Jack handed Lily a helmet, and she swung onto the back of his Harley with a practiced motion, holding tight as the machine came alive beneath them. They pulled out first, the rest of the club following, chrome catching the last rays of sunlight, black leather glinting like waves of shadow and steel. The wind swept through Lily's hair, tugging away the last of the day's weight. She leaned forward, her voice muffled but sure. "Faster, Dad." Jack smiled beneath his helmet. "Hold on, kiddo." The road opened wide before them, clean, endless, forgiving. Behind them, the diner's lights glowed in the twilight. Inside, the new sign by the register caught the glow. "Respect is our dress code." And that's what stuck. Not the shouting, not the video, not even the apology. What stuck was the reminder that decency doesn't shout, it stands. It stands when someone is small and someone else is loud. It stands when the world looks the other way. It stands when a daughter says, "I've got this," and a father answers, "Then I stand with you." And sometimes that's all it takes to make the world just a little quieter, a little fairer, and a little more human.